very bleak out here in the wastes. Very depressing. Out here, there's nothing. Just the sand and the empty shells of robots long since drained of power and scavenged for parts. It's not a very welcoming place at all. There's no sign of anything friendly. Nothing that even seems vaguely familiar. There's just... Wait. What the hell? Is that... I suddenly find myself resisting the urge to break it to a theme song right now. Come on in! I know, it took me about 30 forevers to get to it, but I finally managed to get around to making episode 35 of Low Budget Gaming, and just to warn you, it'll probably take me a few more forevers to get to episode 36. But I am trying to be better about releasing at least one video a month, so hopefully you'll at least have something to keep you interested in the meantime. This will actually be the second episode in what has turned out to be a sort of an impromptu trilogy of revisits for the show, as this time around I'm looking at another title from Wadjet Eye Games, specifically Primordia. Now it's true, I have played a few Wadjet Eye titles for the channel in the past, but this will be the first one I've actually reviewed since Jim and I Rue way back in episode 27. Shardlight and Techno-Babylon were just Let's Plays. Funnily enough, Primordia was released in December of 2012, and what does the game deal with? It's the end of the world, humans are dead and gone, and robots rule the world, so Merry Christmas, I guess. Somewhere in the desert wastes of what is presumably a post-apocalyptic Earth, two robots, Horatio No-Built version 5 and Crispin Horatio Built version 1, are making repairs to their ship, the Unique, when they feel the ship shake from something down in engineering. They rush down just in time to see a bulky robot cut its way into the ship. This is Scraper. He is a jerk. Scraper demands the power core, a glowing crystal which powers the Unique. Horatio tries to stop him, but gets a hole shot in his chest for his troubles, and Scraper takes the power core anyway, tossing Horatio out of the ship as he leaves. Crispin flies over to Horatio and finds that he's more or less okay, so the pair discuss the current situation. As they are robots, without the power core, they only have a limited amount of time before their energy runs out. Crispin himself is already down to 10%. Their first priority, therefore, is to get their emergency generator up and running, so they can at least power the Unique long enough to recharge themselves. Crispin, however, suggests traveling to a place called Metropole, the city of glass and light, but Horatio quickly shoots down that idea, as he thinks Metropole is nothing but trouble, and besides, with little energy and no quick way there, they'd never make it anyway. To get the generator working, Horatio needs to assemble a power-bearing conduit. He'll also need to find a new spark plug, something he told Crispin to do some time ago, but Crispin just half-assed it and covered the old one with conductive putty. A couple of times in the early part of the game, Crispin will sort of deride Horatio for thinking the ship can be fixed in the first place and suggest he just give up and head to Metropole, which is looked at as a sort of a utopia, at least by Crispin. And it's in scenes like this where you can kind of see where he's coming from. The Unique is a shambles, its tail has fallen off, and there are pieces of the ship all over the place. Even its nameplate has fallen off. Huh. It's a funny way to spell Unique. In fact, you could say it's a unique way to spell it. I'll get back to the review now, sorry. There are a couple of conduit segments lying around outside the Unique, so the pair begin looking around the ship for more pieces. During the search, they enter Horatio's bedroom, and while there aren't any conduit segments there, Horatio does take the opportunity to grab his holy book, entitled The Gospel of Man. You see, Mr. No-Built here is a devout follower of humanism, a religion which teaches about man, the all-builder, who was responsible for the start of the Primordium, the first age, the age of building. For man, read whatever deity you want, as the gospel states that he basically created everything from the roads, to the mountains, to the caves, to, eventually, robots. Then lo, man didst looketh upon his creations, which he didst create with his own hands. Then yea, verily, he didst speaketh these words unto him. Alright, peace out, John Yo. And then he sauntered off to a mountaintop and died, thus ending the Primordium. You know, for such a thick-looking book, there's really not that much to the Gospel of Man. They also grab Horatio's plasma torch, which is under his bed for some reason. I mean, I know they're robots, but come on, are they seriously not worried about fire hazards? In a nearby junk pile, they find a new spark plug locked away in a lockbox, as well as the remaining pieces of conduit, which Horatio fuses together with his plasma torch. With all the parts he needs, he cranks up the generator and restores power to the Unique. It's only good for a few days at most, but it allows them to recharge themselves, thus solving their immediate crisis. Crispin again suggests forgetting the ship and taking the train to Metropole, but Horatio is once again quick to dismiss the idea, saying there is no such train, it's too far to walk even on a full charge, but more importantly,
I hate that city. It's in my core logic. I don't know why, but I can't change it.
Okay.
Horatio could make a new power core, but to do so would require a strong power source, which he can't make. But he does have plans in engineering for an energy sensor, so they'll at least know where to look for one. The plans call for a sodium iodide crystal, which they find in Horatio's bedroom. Sheesh, what doesn't he keep in there? A heavy-duty cable, which they find outside. A plug, which Horatio is all too happy to swipe from the radio, considering it was spouting propaganda about Metropole. And finally, a computer to plug the sensor into. With the sensor built, Horatio plugs it into a computer in engineering, and the sensor lists several coordinates which house some kind of energy source. After scouting these coordinates with the Unique's telescope, they find the only useful places listed, besides the Unique itself and the junk pile, are a gigantic robot buried up to its head, and some kind of strange device which has caused the sand around it to turn to glass. They explore the giant robot first. Horatio cuts off the tip of one of its fingers to try to tap into its power cables, but has no luck. Next, they go inside the robot and find two servitors. There are actually supposed to be three, but one split off from the other two, which has made them all little doolally. They also find the robot's brain, which is malfunctioning. Repairing the brain and reuniting the servitors activates the giant robot, who calls out to Horatio, though strangely referring to him as Horus. He identifies himself as Goliath Man-Built and seems to recognize Horatio of old as being a figure of destruction, calling him an ancient enemy. Still, it was Horatio who restored him to life just now, so Goliath gives him a decryption module, which he says will restore Horatio, before demanding that the pair leave. With that avenue for more power closed, Horatio and Crispin travel to the strange device.
It looks like a big bomb.
Full of little bombs.
The cluster bomb is guarded by a robot named Ever-Faithful Leo-Built, who says he is, quote, once more in our hero's service, and describes the cluster bomb as a shrine. Horatio seems a bit confused, as he doesn't remember meeting Ever-Faithful before, but Ever-Faithful, who, you know what, I'm just going to start calling EF now for the sake of my tongue, says they first met when Horatio was version 1 and claimed the shrine was some kind of weapon to be used against him. They met again when Horatio was version 3 and seemed to be more mellow, and it was then that EF taught him the principles of humanism and gave him the Gospel of Man. To test whether Horatio is still a devout follower and worthy to pray at the shrine, i.e. get at the bomb, EF quizzes Horatio on topics covered in the Gospel, which he passes with flying colors. Then a final question. Who are you? Horatio tries several different answers, but EF doesn't seem to like any of them until Horatio tries a different reply. Horus. This finally satisfies EF, who says that when he looks at Horatio, he sees two words inscribed upon him. Friend. Horus. After showing the Gospel of Man to EF at his request, Horatio and Crispin are allowed access to the shrine, and from it, they take a bomblet marked B325, noting that a holder next to it marked B734 is empty. Before leaving, they ask if EF has seen Scraper. Turns out the metal book had been this way only a few hours ago, when he took an explosive from the bomb, hence the empty holder, and headed towards a large concrete dome. At the dome, they find a broken down android, from which they take a radio transmitter, which Horatio powers with a battery they found in the junk pile thanks to the energy sensor. Speaking of which, after finding a targeting CPU in an old anti-aircraft gun, he combines it with the energy sensor, as well as an LCD monitor he picked up back at the Unique, to make the energy sensor portable. The door of the dome won't open, no matter what they try, so, making clever use of the bomblet and the transmitter, Horatio easily solves that particular problem. Inside, they find what appears to be an abandoned subway station. Horatio operates a ticket booth, and after stating that it has collected 5 megacycles, it dispenses a ticket. They enter the terminal and, much to Crispin's excitement, find a train to Metropole. Despite Horatio's misgivings, they still need their power core, and they've run out of places to look in the wastes, so with only one option left, it's all aboard to Metropole. But Metropole is not as bright and shiny as Crispin has been led to believe, and as they begin their exploration, the energy sensor goes wild, picking up a major power source coming from a nearby tower before burning out. They're about to investigate further when they're stopped by a greeter bot who welcomes them on behalf of someone named Metromind. The bot detects the 5 megacycle debt Horatio accrued back at the dome in the wastes, and it paralyzes him, saying that it is currently collecting one of those megacycles.
I don't think it's ever explicitly stated what megacycles are, but I think it has something to do with the robot's brain power, or their equivalent of a brain anyway, for a couple of reasons, one of which we'll see in a moment.
During the attack, the greeter bot also swipes Horatio's Gospel of Man and tosses it over a bridge. When the bot leaves, Horatio has a hallucination of a decaying Crispin, but he soon recovers and they begin their exploration of the city, with Horatio saying they'll deal with Metromind later. On one of the city's main streets, they're called over by a trader bot named Leopold Steeplebuilt, version 7. He tells them, among other things, that Metromind is in charge of the entire city and that Horatio can't just talk to her. Rather, she'll talk to him when she's good and ready. As for his Gospel of Man, any mention of man or humanism has been decreed taboo, so contraband items like his Gospel are automatically tossed in an area known as the Underworks.
So, for games like Primordia, where the gameplay is not so much non-linear, but the tasks you have to accomplish to get to the end are arranged in such a way that you could do some of the steps out of order, I base my plot synopsis on my first playthrough, which is generally what you're seeing when you look at game footage in my reviews. But the thing is, once you get to Metropole, if you're not sure what you're doing, you're probably going to be going back and forth quite a lot trying to get some clue as to what to do next, and I kind of felt like that convoluted the story a little bit. It probably didn't help in my case that I decided to spend so much time at the information kiosk to try and read up on some lore. And yes, I know there's a way to actually get hints as to what to do next within the game, but we'll get to that later, and besides, I wanted to try and figure things out on my own as much as I could. But anyway, after going back and pretty much solely watching the parts of gameplay with dialogue, I managed to narrow down the key story points of the latter 2/3 of the game or so.
During an indeterminate length of time before the game takes place, Metropole was ruled over by the Council of Robots, consisting of 5 robots, all with the fabronymic or surname of Man-Built, and each tasked with overseeing a different function in the city. Arbiter, who presided over legal proceedings in the courthouse. Metromind, who was in charge of the city's subways. Steeple, who headed a cathedral for the humans that lived in Metropole. Memorius, the city's record keeper. And Factor, who built almost half the robot population of the city. Eventually, through a series of manipulations, Metromind arranged to get rid of the other 4 council members so that now, she alone rules Metropole with an iron fist. While discussing the loss of his power core with Leopold, the Traderbot suggests Horatio plead his case before Arbiter in the courthouse. He and Crispin make their way there, but find a line of other robots waiting to air their grievances. Horatio solves each of the different bots' problems so that they can leave, but soon encounters another obstacle. The courthouse is locked. With no way into the courthouse for now, they decide to search the Underworks for Horatio's Gospel of Man. While there, they're attacked by zombie-like robots known as shells.
The shells are the other reason I consider megacycles to be some kind of brain energy, as they're constantly calling out for cycles and memories, much like a zombie would with brains. Hell, they've even got the walk down.
Before the shells can get close to our heroes, however, the pair are saved by a robot named Clarity Arbiter-Built. Clarity is one of 2 law clerks built by Arbiter to assist him in overseeing cases. She is a devout follower of the letter of the law, and as such doesn't seem entirely too sympathetic to Horatio's power core plight, but nonetheless does seem willing to help. First, however, in return for saving their lives, she gives them the key to the courthouse and requests that they ask Arbiter if she could return to him. They enter the courthouse at last, and Horatio begins to plead his case, but Arbiter doesn't seem to be paying attention. In fact, he doesn't seem to be doing anything at all. Upon closer examination, they find that Arbiter has wiped his own memory banks, essentially committing suicide. While nearby in a dark corner, they find Charity, Clarity's sister, who appears to have shot herself in the head. Horatio extracts some memories from Charity, which shows Arbiter sending Clarity away as he no longer requires her assistance, hence why she was hanging out in the underworks.
This, plus the double suicide, were again due to the malevolent machinations of the manipulative Metromind. Holy shit, I got that out in one take!
Upon seeing the memories, Clarity, who had no great love for Metromind in the first place, decides it's high time to get rid of her. But to even get at her, they'll need to get into the Council Tower, which requires a 16-digit passcode. Clarity only has 3 fragments of the code, and she doesn't know their proper order. The code was known only to the Council, but while the Council members themselves are gone, their remnants live on in various robots throughout the city. Eventually, the trio obtain the Council code, ascend the tower, and confront Metromind, but Scraper shows up as well, so Clarity sacrifices herself to keep Scraper at bay, while she sends Horatio and Crispin into an emergency elevator and leaves them with 2 words, Calliope Station. Back at the subway, they examine the subway map and find a switch hidden in the waypoint for Calliope Station. This opens a secret tunnel through which they find Metromind's core. As she taunts Horatio about his past, he begins destroying all the components in the room, but before he can destroy the mainframe itself, she paralyzes him again and starts collecting the remaining 4 megacycles. Crispin, however, is not about to let that happen, and so he sets himself to overload and rams straight into Metromind, killing her and restoring Horatio back to normal. The resulting explosion also knocked a data chip onto the floor. Horatio uses the decryption module given to him by Goliath to unlock the data chip, and finally discovers the truth about his past.
Remember that nameplate of the Unique? Well, as it turns out, the Unique is not so unique after all. The robot we've known as Horatio started out as Horus Man-Built, an airship built as a superweapon during an event known as the War of the 4 Cities, a conflict from back when there were still humans in the world involving Metropole, as well as Urbani, where Horus was from, as well as Civitas and Municipia.
An attack by Metropole leaves all the human crew of the Horus dead, so the ship's AI takes over with one goal: retaliation, the destruction of Metropole. On the way, the ship encountered Goliath, who fired a cluster bomb missile at the Horus, but the ship activated its jammers and diverted the cluster bomb away. Goliath began to charge some kind of energy weapon. The Horus, being heavily damaged at this point in the battle, uploaded a virus known as Thanatos onto Goliath, which caused him to fragment his internal functions and disabled him. With Goliath out of the way, the Horus resumed its retaliation mission, but when it reached Metropole and detected life signs, something made the Horus's AI hesitate. Even though all life in Urbani had been wiped out at this point in the war, and it was still being directed to destroy the life signs in Metropole, the AI queried its own surname, Man-Built.
From this, he realized that he was built by humans, therefore humans build. Therefore, humans must survive, therefore Metropole must survive.
When his directive to destroy tried to assert itself again, the AI ignored it, instead uploading a partial backup to the ship's lone servitor, thereby creating Horatio Null-Built version 1 and self-destructing.
With Metromind dead and gone, Horatio returns to the tower to find Metromind? The hell?
Yes, the tyrannical train conductor is still around, saying the thing in the secret tunnel was merely a shell, and that she lives on in every robot that traded her a megacycle. However, she also says that Crispin's attack destroyed Metromind version 391, removing the last bit of her selfishness, and she is now version 392.
Oh, okay, so a different Metromind. Cool. At least maybe we can get our power core back peacefully.
She offers Horatio a choice: join her and create a new Primordia, or Scraper gets to have his way with him.
Oh, so not so different after all. Great. Depending on the actions you take and the items that you pick up, especially in the last part of the game, you could end up with anywhere from 10 to 12 different endings. The one I got, where I killed Scraper, took my power core back, and revived Crispin, was I think a step or two below what is considered the best ending. The only reason I didn't get that was because I didn't realize you could revive Clarity as well. Of all the titles from Wadjet Eye Games I've played thus far, Primordia's story is dark, possibly on par with Shardlight in terms of its tone. Humans are already extinct by the time the game starts. The remaining robot population is vulnerable because of their dependence on what little energy there is in the world, and depending on the final choice you make, there could well be no one left alive by the end of the game, not even Horatio. The plot is straightforward on the whole, even with the twist of Horatio being Horace, which I don't think was as powerful as in other games, considering the game was dropping not-so-subtle hints about it left and right, and by the time it was actually revealed, you'll have probably figured it out long before Horatio ever did. Still, it is a good story, although that's nothing new. At this point, I've come to expect that from Wadjet Eye.
The initial thing that came to mind when I first saw Primordia was how each of the Wadjet Eye titles I've played thus far seem to be color-coded, so to speak, depending on their theme. Gemini Rue was very gray and muted as befit its noir atmosphere. Even the items in your inventory were almost totally gray. A yellowish-green hue dominated the world of Shardlight, owing to the nuclear fallout and people everywhere dying of a highly infectious disease, appropriately enough called green lung. Techno-Babylon, with its futuristic technological setting, had an abundance of blue within many of its environments, especially in the virtual reality known as the trance. And then there's Primordia, again set in some kind of post-apocalypse, but this time, no matter where you look, be it in the wastes or in the city, everything, everywhere, is almost totally brown, emphasizing the feeling of utter desolation.
It's a powerful effect, to be sure, but looking at it from a purely critical standpoint, it's a little bit hard on the eyes. Now granted, brown wasn't the only color there was in this game, of course, there were other colors as well, but a good portion of them were dull and muted.
I do like the designs for the characters though, in particular the heroes. In some of the close-ups of Horatio, he looks like he's seen better days, and probably has considering he's up to version 5 when we first meet him. His weathered look, and the fact he's wearing what looks like a hooded trench coat he probably just picked up in the waste somewhere, really sells the fact he's a scavenger with perhaps not the happiest of histories. Although there's a little inconsistency between the art and the sprite animation, as in the close-ups, Horatio quite clearly has no mouth, yet when playing the game, if he's speaking while looking towards the camera, there's a moving mouth animation. The inconsistency is even more strange when added to the fact that Crispin doesn't have that particular quirk. Speaking of Crispin, while I like his design as well, I feel like it wasn't quite as successful in terms of his origins. There's a bit in the early part of the game when Horatio remarks that he built Crispin out of spare parts, but honestly, I don't see that. To me, he looks more like he was just built right out of the box just before the game began.
Nonetheless, he does look like something Horatio could have built, spare parts or otherwise, and I think their designs complement each other nicely. Also, can I just say, I found out while browsing the Steam discussions that someone made plushies of Horatio and Crispin, and they are absolutely the most kawaii thing ever, and I may or may not want one. That was out loud, wasn't it? Whoops.
With the exception of the end credit song Cycles, the majority of the individual BGM tracks are more pieces of ambience than actual musical pieces, consisting mainly of sweeping synths and strings, with the occasional soft percussion or other instruments played staccato to help drive the beat. None of the tracks stood out as being exceptionally good or bad, again with the exception of the ending song, which I quite liked. Still, the music complemented the tone of each scene adequately and wasn't intrusive at all. Well, except for when you first start the game up and both audio sliders are at max, making the music overpower the dialogue, but you know that's easily fixable.
Lastly, let's talk about the performance of some of the characters in the game, starting with Horatio.
Horatio was voiced by Logan Cunningham, who was probably best known as being the voice of the narrator in the game Bastion.
Now, I never really played much of Bastion, but I watched some video clips of his performance in that game, and he did great. In this game, it's adequate, I guess.
My main problem with his performance here is that he barely emotes. Now, Horatio is presented as this sort of world-weary scavenger, so that's fine for maybe 80% of his performance. But the rest of the time, like when he's trying to stop Scraper, or when his stance on humanism is called into question, or when it seems like Clarity is stonewalling him because she doesn't think his power core was actually stolen. Any situation that calls for some kind of range, he always sounds like he's just about to crank up the appropriate emotion, but stops just short.
Stop right there. This ship belongs to me.
Next, we move on to Crispin, voiced by Abe Goldfarb. Now, Goldfarb has shown up in quite a number of Wadjet Eye games. He was the voice of Cain in Gemini Rue, as well as the main villain, Tiberius, in Shardlight. I think he was in Techno-Babylon, too. Now let me see, what did he play?
Oh my, yes.
Damn it, now I'm gonna have that stuck in my head again.
Anyway, Crispin has a mainly sarcastic personality, and Goldfarb injects just the right amount of acerbic wit into just about every one of Crispin's one-liners. But at the same time, there are occasions when Crispin shows great concern for something, especially the well-being of Horatio, and again, this is displayed brilliantly, and I'd say Crispin is by far the better acted of the duo from the Unique.
He knows, but he's not mad.
Pot, meat, kettle.
With that said, my vote for the best of the heroes is neither of them. That honor would have to go to Clarity.
Voiced by Sarah El Male, Clarity Arbiter-Built is a strictly logical robot that adheres to the letter of the law. From the moment she makes her first appearance, she makes one impression, and that impression is, cross her at your own peril. That said, for such a logical robot, she's not entirely without heart or emotion, and El Male quite capably delivers Clarity's cold rage as she finds out what Metromite has been doing, and how she manipulated her creator Arbiter and her sister Charity. She had excellent chemistry with Crispin, and I felt they played off each other quite nicely. Less so with Horatio, again due to his mostly monotone performance.
And if man is gone forever, if there is nothing but you, the ship, and the force of entropy?
Don't forget about me.
I was including you within the force of entropy.
About the only major character left is Metromind, voiced by Noni Craig, and I don't really have that much to say about her. Despite her significance to the plot, we don't really see that much of her outside the latter third of the game, but what we do see of her is acted well. Overall, a decent performance by the cast in general.
Before moving on, it should be noted that for some users, Primordia might not run right after downloading. In my case, I got an error message, and I hadn't started Bandicam yet, so I don't remember what it said precisely. It was to do with graphics and not being able to run at 640 by 480 or something like that. But anyway, if that happens to you, try going into the game's files and running a program called WinSetup. And then in the graphics settings, make sure you have Run in a Window instead of Full Screen checked, and change your graphics driver to DirectDraw 5 and your graphics filter to 4x nearest neighbor filter, and that should hopefully get the game running for you.
Being a Wadjet Eye title made in Adventure Game Studio, Primordia is of course a point-and-click adventure. According to commentary from the dev team, which by the way you can turn on or off at any time from the menu, the game was designed to be as user-friendly as possible, and you know what? It shows. The game is accommodating to the player, but not so much as to be considered hand-holding. For one thing, the game has room for an abundance of save slots. I don't know how many exactly, but I got up to 20 before I was done, and that's not counting the autosave, which kicks in when you enter a new room. Horatio doesn't really do much with things in the field. He can either examine something by right-clicking it, or interact with it or pick it up by left-clicking. But in many cases, it's when an item is actually in the inventory that Horatio can come into his own. With Horatio being a scavenger, he would naturally need to make most of the things he needs out of spare parts, which is why in Primordia's inventory, many items aren't one use only, as with many other adventure games, but they stick around throughout much of your game, whereas other items can be combined to make new items, or in some cases, improve another. There's even a few points in the game where you have to trade items, again, a natural fit for a scavenger like Horatio.
And there's also Crispin, of course. He doesn't just float around and look pretty. He's got some uses to him as well.
Many times there will be an item or a hotspot you need to get to that's out of Horatio's reach. That's where Crispin comes into play. Moving your mouse to the top of the screen brings down a toolbar, on the left of which you'll find a Crispin button. Clicking that will replace your cursor with a Crispin icon, which you can then use to have Crispin interact with the item or hotspot. Crispin also serves as an in-game hint system. From time to time, if you haven't made any progress, he'll chime in and give you a clue as to something you still need to do at that point. However, if you're like me and you want to try to take your time and figure things out yourself whenever possible, you can go into the menu and turn automatic hints off, making it so that Crispin will only give you a hint if you left-click on him. Also in the toolbar is a data pouch, which has two modes, data and map. Think of it as a Pip-Boy with a little less functionality. The map function highlights any areas you've discovered and serves as a fast travel system, so although you may do a lot of backtracking between areas as you play, this at least cuts down on the actual walking time, which is a nice touch. The data function, meanwhile, serves as an in-game journal, keeping track of any and all bits of information that seems noteworthy. You'll note that I said seems noteworthy, as to throw in just a little bit of confusion, some of the bits of info you pick up won't have any real relevance to the game whatsoever, like this shopping list you find on the floor of the Unique.
Unless, of course, that was somehow relevant to the game. In which case, I would like to humbly apologize to a robot named Emma for preventing her from making her pastrami bagel sandwiches. I'm sure they were going to be quite delicious. Primordia is an easy game to learn with an interesting, if fairly straightforward story, and the puzzles are challenging, but I think, on the whole, fair. I don't remember being stumped on any of the puzzles without it being my fault. It's about on par with the other Wadjet Eye titles I've played as far as game time. My run was about 5.5 hours long. The aesthetic is a little rough, sure, but really, that's about the only major complaint I can level at it. So, with that said, my final verdict is that Primordia is worth every cent. So as you may know, if you follow my social media, it was my plan originally to, starting with this episode, this video, preview upcoming projects in an effort to maybe garner more interest in them and by extension maybe the channel. But owing to recent developments, I'm not actually going to do that with this video. If you're still interested, if you still want to know what I've got coming up, then I'll post that sometime after this episode is released on social media. And you'll forgive me, I hope, if there are a lot of ums and uhs and stutters during this bit, but this is more or less completely off the cuff. I didn't really script this. I just made a few quick notes so I'd have some idea as to what to say. But during the making of this video, it came to my attention that someone I knew in my old day job had died of cancer. Exactly what kind of cancer, I don't know, but then does that really matter? It's cancer. It still sucks, no matter what the form. Her name was Lacey Sharp. She was a reporter at the TV station that I used to work at. And I didn't really know her. I wasn't fortunate enough to know her well enough to really call her a friend, but the areas that we used to work in, myself in master control and she in the control room when she would occasionally produce the news, they were adjacent to each other, and she would take the time to say hi and have a good night as she passed by. It's weird. As I say, I didn't really know her that well, but when the news reached me, it hit me harder than I expected. And I don't really know why. Maybe it was because she was such a nice, sweet person. Maybe because the whole situation was just so unexpected, came out of nowhere. Maybe even a little bit of guilt on my part for, as I say, she would take time to say hello and have a good night as she passed by, and me being the awkward antisocial idiot that I am, the most I would ever do is just, and maybe that's just a little bit of guilt for not returning more of her kindness. I don't know. But the fact remains, it's very sad. And she obviously has family and a great many friends in the area, and she will be missed sorely. And really, I think that's about it. So if you've stayed through this whole segment and watched me stumble through this, I guess all I could say now is thank you for listening.